Hello, Guilty Feminists, and welcome to this special Culture Club edition of the podcast. My guest today has been a stand-up comedian and comedy writer for many years. She's a regular at the Edinburgh Fringe and on BBC Radio 4. She's now written her first book, The Funny Thing About Death, all the profits from which are going to Macmillan Cancer Support. Please welcome the incredible Jo Caulfield. Woo!
Woohoo for me.
Jo, it's so wonderful to have you on. I loved your book, The Funny Thing About Death, so much, and I read it really in 2 or 3 sittings. It was a real page-turner, beautifully written, and one of the most vulnerable, open, honest books about death and about the love for your sister. And you didn't just sort of paint her in one shade, as we often do when someone dies. We just want to focus on what was positive about them, but you sort of honor her with honesty of her in all her glory, her flaws, her best moments, her worst moments. And it really is something. I'm so impressed by it. What led you to write this book? What was this? Did it just come out of you? Did you feel compelled to write it? Did you think long and hard before you did it?
It started as a compulsion of just getting thoughts out of my head. Just things going round and round in my head to do with our relationship, to do with not quite being able to believe that she wasn't here. I think it took me about 2 years to really grasp that she had gone. So I just wrote some things down, and then I did put it out on Twitter because I was a bit like, do other people feel this? And then getting that feedback from people, then I thought, oh, maybe I have something to say. And also because I got very angry about the positivity around cancer, because they seem to be constantly, Channel 4. And I remember hearing the continuity announcer going, says, we've all had enough of cancer. Here's Stand Up to Cancer. Now, obviously, I want people to raise money to fight cancer. But sometimes it just all seems very glib. And it seemed like a dirty little secret that millions of people are still dying from cancer. There's a lot about beating cancer, but not so much about dying, and not so much about dying quietly without telling everybody everything. It seemed the fashion that you had to, let everybody know everything. So I was like, well, there's another way to deal with it too. So I want to share that. So at first it was just everything pouring out. It wasn't a book. It was just my head on paper. And then I think it was getting feedback that I thought, oh, maybe there is a book, and also the idea that I could use Annie's writing. Because of her being a writer, I thought, well, this would appeal to her, because then people will hear her voice and get to know her. And that was mainly what it was. I wanted people to see what, to feel her, to see what kind of person she was. And I was worried because she was very funny, and I was worried, oh, maybe that's not coming across. You could take everything I'm saying as just her being grumpy, but actually it's very funny. So I thought, her writing, she's better at getting that across than me. So putting that in there as well. Her funny writing, but some of the more serious stuff as well. One of the nicest things somebody said to me was the partner of Linda Smith. Linda died of cancer at 47. And he just sent me a note just saying, it's a huge gaping hole in your life that will never be filled. And it made me laugh. It was the first time I laughed because I thought, oh, thank you. That's what it's like. And I thought it was funny that he didn't try and sugarcoat it or anything, and he didn't offer any form of consolation. And that was actually what I wanted at that moment, for someone just to say, this is absolutely awful and it doesn't get better. And that made me feel good.
I fully get that. And as much as we want to comfort each other, sometimes it's just good to acknowledge if you're not feeling better about it, that's normal, that's human. There's good reasons why you're not going to feel better about it. And my experience with grief is it doesn't hurt any less, but it hurts less often. And that's maybe not true for everyone either. It depends on your relationship with the person. It depends how close you were. It depends how connected you were. It depends what other tent poles are in your life. It's so personal. And that's what I got from this book, is actually, this is not an account of death. This is an account of being the sister of Annie and losing Annie. And what that does is it ignites everyone's personal relationship with it, instead of it being some book where you go, this is how you cope with death. You, reader, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, all I can tell you is this is who Annie was and who Annie was to me, and what it's like losing Annie. And that in the personal, you get the universal, because in the ways in which I experienced grief and still experience grief about my father, I felt those connection points because they were so personal, and some of them were very, very different. But then that made me think about the ways in which losing my father, or my relationship with my sister that I grew up with, or my biological sisters, or how those things might be different, or in fact the same, and have resonances. And what the biggest thing I got from this book was, I was like, oh, I really know Annie. I felt like obviously I don't really know her. I didn't meet her, and I don't want to minimize people who did know her, but I felt like your honesty and your really beautiful portrayal of her and your featuring her writing, I felt like, oh, I know who this person was. And that was a wonderful gift to be given in a book by such sensitive writing. How important was it for you to tell us about who Annie really was in all her facets? Because she just seems like such a really unique, wonderful person to know, with so much life and personality, and
Yeah.
and all of life, because life isn't just one note lovely, you know.
Complicated. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Very complicated person who was incredibly lovable, and I don't think she knew how lovable she was. And it was really important. And also just such a great character. I thought, it's ridiculous that she's not still here, because she had so much to offer. And I felt she was worth knowing. And so if I could, that you saying that is the most wonderful thing that I want to get from having written the book, is that people say, oh, I really feel I knew her. And a couple of people have said, oh, I've gone onto Amazon to find her books because I want to hear more of her voice, which is absolutely the best thing, and is very much appealed to her ego to go, I can hear her going, yes, you see, I am more interesting. And so that it's sort of, and it was also because I looked up to her so much, and even with her faults, because I think it's, that's what unconditional love is. You don't care about their faults. You see them, and it doesn't change how you feel. But I also thought, oh, how do I go on? I've always had her and her ahead of me, So I've sort of watched her and then maybe gone this way on my own, but I can see where she's going. So I've had someone ahead of me, and I think sometimes that maybe made life easier for me than it was for her. So it was thinking about kind of, who am I now she's not here? Am I who I am a lot because of her? So there's a lot to go through, as well as just the missing of the person.
Yes, that's so true. It changes who you are when someone you love, who's always been there for you, dies. When my father died, I thought, who do I do it for now? And I was so surprised, because I didn't know I was doing it for him. But I sort of realized that everything I'd ever done was really just me drawing a picture and going, Daddy, do you like it? And it was a terrible thing to realize that, I'd moved to another hemisphere, and I'd done all these, things, some of which he didn't really even understand what I was doing, in the way that your parents don't always know what you're doing in show business, or don't get it, or whatever. But it was that, and it was that just overnight, half my unconditional love was gone. And could never be replaced, because, there are people like, your parents sort of have to, they don't have to, but often unconditionally love you. And I think I got that feeling with Annie, that her love for you was unconditional, and how important that was, even though she could be difficult. It's a sort of peeling away of something that is absolutely tangible in your life, in terms of your attachments. But I also absolutely loved it, just as a sort of a really brilliant account of what it was like being a young person in the 1980s. And like in the book, you talk about hitchhiking with your sister when you were teenagers.
I know.
And your parents were okay with that. And your parents seem quite protective. And I don't know anyone who would let their teenagers hitchhike knowingly now.
Yeah, my parents are, my dad's not here now, but I think my dad was always a little more obsessed with himself. So I think it was things like that they didn't notice or think through, that maybe. But also Annie, she was 20, so I was 16. So I think they just thought, well, Annie's an adult now, that'll be fine. And as I say, I think they were a bit busy with themselves. So,
Yeah.
and even I at 16 knew it was a dumb idea.
Yeah.
But it was that thing of my big sister knows, and Annie didn't ever want to think anything through too much because that might stop you doing something, and throw yourself into it, and then you'll have some stories to tell. And so, of course, it was terrible because she would always sit in the front and then give me the sign when she would get groped, which she would.
Oh,
and
my
then we got into
God.
a lorry, and that was it was the lorry one was when we were Swiss Alps, and I remember because we were slowing down. It was hairpin bends, and I was terrified of that. And she said and said to me in the next bend, "Get your rucksack, jump out." And so that's exactly what we did. And then we're there. But, all sorts of terrible things. I mean, we never got actually attacked, but we did get, there was lots of attempts because people would go, what on earth are young women doing here?
Well, 16-year-old, you're barely a woman. You're a girl, really. You're still a minor. There's one story where you get driven into a forest and...
Oh, my God.
That's so terrifying.
And it was so clearly what was going to happen. And this was the thing with Anne, was like she would always want it to turn out well. So she would kind of push on through. So this man, and he was quite handsome as well, older man, but I mean, older obviously could have been 30 for all,
Yeah, for all you know, retrospectively, yeah.
Yeah. So, and he was quite handsome, and Annie was very excited, chatting away with him in French, and I could see her enjoying it, because she was always a little outside herself going, look at me living this life, and because I'm going to write that down now. And then he turned off the road and said, I know a good place to camp. And then the road became not a road and was a track, and we were going into woods, and then we were completely in a wood. And I remember thinking, this is like Little Red Riding Hood. This is the beginning of every horror film, is girls being driven into a wood. And then he left us there and said, it's a good place to camp. And he left. And I thought, well, this seems a really scary place to camp, even before knowing he was trying to molest us. But we started to set up the tent, and then I saw him, and my blood ran cold. And I just said to Annie, he's back. It's the man. And then apparently he said that he had put money on the windscreen. So that when we got in the car, we knew that there was going to be some sort of transaction. And all I remember, yes, he said that he'd given a sign, so he assumed that we would be okay with it. And Annie was talking to him in French, and this was funny because it made me think how different we were. I was standing behind her with a saucepan, ready to hit him over the head, right? And then I remember the phrase "que à la main," and I thought, is that hand job? That's what it sounds like. That he was arguing that he'd put the money in there, so he's expecting some sort of job from us, And then Annie shouted at him, and he got, all cross and then stomped off. But then we were still left, and it was getting dark, and we were in the woods. So then we had to, pack up again, because I was like, we can't stay here.
Because he knows
and
where you are.
We went back to the road, really dark, couldn't see. And then where we camped that night, didn't realise till the morning, we heard all this noise outside the tent, and we'd camped in a quarry. But it was a working quarry.
Oh, my God.
And there was all diggers and men stomping around doing it. It was like, oh, my God, just terrible.
I mean...
And also we had no money at all, So I remember that was the other thing. I thought, we went to Lausanne. And I remember going back to Lausanne years later, doing some comedy gigs, and just going, oh, how great to be able to go in a coffee shop and buy a coffee. Because when I came here before, we had absolutely nothing. We sat and we went, oh, isn't this really lovely? We've got to hitchhike somewhere else because we don't have any money to buy anything.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. It's amazing you survived it. Hello, Guilty Feminists. This is Deborah. We're recording more live episodes, and you can come and see us at Soho Theatre on the 18th and 19th of August. 18th of August will be a one-on-one chat with me and award-winning journalist Yomi Adekake, who wrote Slay in Your Lane, and it's about her new book, The List, which is totally fascinating. It's about a couple who are about to get married, and then an anonymous list comes out on the internet saying that various men are predators or abusers in some way, and our lead character's fiancé is mentioned on the list. It's got so many twists and turns, and it's a real analysis of where we are right now in society and the internet. It's so beautifully handled and managed and nuanced and thought-provoking. It's one of the best novels I've read in many years. And I really, really hope you can come because Yomi is honestly one of my favorite people in the world. I'm not just saying that, I mean it. That's the 18th of August, but we're also there on the 19th of August. We are live in Chichester on the 21st of August, where we'll be talking to the cast of my new play, Never Have I Ever. You can also see my new play, Never Have I Ever, if you can get to Chichester in September. It's starring Susan Wokoma, Greg Wise, Alexandra Roach, and Amit Shah, and is being directed by the incredible Emma Butler. And we're recording episodes of The Guilty Feminist and Global Pillage at the London Podcast Festival on Saturday the 16th and Sunday the 17th of September. For tickets to any of these, go to guiltyfeminist.com and click on live shows, except if you want to go to the play, and then I want you to go to cft.org.uk. You can also get ad-free episodes via Patreon, Apple Podcasts, or Acast Plus. And if you're passing iTunes or Spotify and you felt like leaving us a 5-star review, we'd love you forever. It really does help people find the podcast, as does subscribing or following. And now, back to the podcast. You say in the book the worst thing in life to Annie was to be boring. And the adventures you had with her, whatever they were not boring.
Exactly.
There's a brilliant account of you living, I think, like around the Portobello Road, West London. And Annie was working with an artist. You were in a band. Is that it?
Yeah, this was when I was very drifty phase. So I was sort of doing odd jobs, or I may have started selling vintage clothes because I did that for a while because I was very into rockabilly and I was in a rockabilly band. That was my whole life, and rockabilly friends. And Annie got a job being sort of cleaner and cook for the very famous artist Bridget Riley. And Bridget says that she used to put an advert in Time Out magazine because she needed a housekeeper, but she wanted it to be somebody who needed the job for the money, but also was artistic. Because she could offer them a flat at the top of her lovely house in Holland Park. You had this little self-contained studio flat. So she was like, I don't want them to devote themselves to me. I want them to have their own thing, but they need to cook 3 meals a day and keep the stairs clean and do my laundry and that. And she said that Annie came to the door and she was about to interview Annie for the job. And then she noticed that Anne had brought a suitcase. And she said, I remember it was a silver suitcase. And I just thought, she's rather marvellous. I'm just going to give her the job because she seems to have arrived, she said, So
Wonderful.
and they got on really well. And Annie fitted into it and would do the work part of it very well. And they were friends, till the end. She would always go to Bridget's shows. And that was the weird, like if it was in a movie, you wouldn't believe it, that Bridget Riley had an exhibition on, a retrospective in Edinburgh, and it was during the festival. And I saw the band, I saw the paintings that I was so used to sort of running up to see Annie in her place at the top of Bridget's house. And down in the studio would be these huge paintings with all the stripes. And in the studio, and people would be filling them in. And I'd be like, oh, she doesn't even do it herself, because I know nothing about art. And then I saw these big stripy paintings and it was like, oh my God, that was the whole of the sort of mid-80s to me.
Yeah.
But I didn't go. And then I was in London probably a year later, not like me to do this. I went to the Hayward Gallery, just don't know why. And it said that exhibition was coming back. So I booked tickets for me and my sister's partner, Martin, to go. And we went on the Saturday morning and I saw these paintings. I thought, God, I know these so well. And I turned around and there was Bridget Riley.
Amazing.
And she was sitting there looking herself. She's in a wheelchair, but still looking as bright as ever. And there were some people who spotted her. And I thought, don't bother her. But then I thought, no, it won't be a bother. She'd come to Annie's funeral. So I went up, and as soon as she saw me, she was just like, oh, and she held my hand, and she could not have been more gracious and lovely. And she explained to Annie who I was, to her friends who I was, who Annie had been, and just said the loveliest things about Annie. And she said to her friend, she said, oh, Annie was so funny, she would make me laugh. She'd worked for me for about 3 months. And then she said to me, she said, Bridget, these paintings of yours, they're just all the same. And she went, I thought it was so refreshing, and she was just absolutely lovely. And Annie said that she learned a lot from Bridget about how to be an artist, how to devote yourself to it, But Martin, her partner, said, no, I think she just learned that she'd really like to have staff and a cleaner. That's what she would like from Bridget's life. Yeah.
I just had a quick look at Bridget's paintings while you were talking about it because I just wanted to have it in my mind. And there are some extraordinary ones, and they are all very geometric, but there's so much evocation of that era in them. And I think that your book as well really brings that era to life and actually makes you rather sentimental for it, I think. And there are people that were not alive in the 80s that have been listening to this, and it's just a great snapshot. But I think one of the wonderful things about it was like how free, in some ways, how much more in danger women were. In some ways, how much freer women were because of just the nature of, well, you go off and do your own thing, and there's a payphone to call your mum and dad occasionally, but they're not expecting to hear from you. And, you can go and make your mark and do your own thing and be your own person. And there's not a lot of internet telling you what you should be or shouldn't be. You just find your little community and you go for it. And I think those stories really delighted me, as well as actually stories of your childhood in Northern Ireland and Wales. That was more 70s, that it was a real view into, it's like a new view out of a familiar window.
I mean, lots of people who I went to school with, I would say most people lived completely different lives, and they went to university and got proper jobs. I think we were odd. And also, I still think it's odd that my parents didn't go, what do you mean you've just gone to London at 17?
Yeah.
But weirdly, I think they lived very conventional lives and were teachers. They left Northern Ireland. My dad very much wanted to get out of Northern Ireland. And then I think, but he wasn't happy in the job he did. He was, a frustrated performer. And I think they were like, no, let's see which way you want to go and find it. And which does lead to, it's not an easy choice sometimes, because you do go, oh God, I've got, you can be 30 and go, oh, and I was 30 going, oh, I'm still waitressing, or where is this life? But at the same time, I knew what I didn't want to do. And I knew I didn't fit into other worlds and being told what to do. And London, I think for young people now, like then, London was cheap. You could live, get a job easily. I lived in Notting Hill, and it wasn't fancy, but you could live in the centre of town, and in that way, it seemed an easier time. And if you were that sort of person, it was then you gravitated to London. That's where people came. People would leave. Now people would stay in Manchester and be interesting, but everybody came to London then. So there were lots and lots of like-minded people doing odd things, and I think it was still coming out of that sort of punk ethos of do it yourself. You can do this. You don't have to have that safe job that's there.
Yeah.
But like I say, there was a lot of people not doing that who were being very normal. Yeah.
Yes, very. But it is quite strange that your parents were quite conventional and yet had two daughters, both highly unconventional. One, assisting an artist and becoming a writer, and you becoming a stand-up comic and a writer, and you're both so free, and you have such wonderful adventures in the book that I think it's sort of, the book is the spirit of Annie as well, because it's anything but boring. It's every chapter's different, every chapter's new, and so I think if anybody is just interested in from a this is the Guilty Feminist, from a feminist perspective,
yes.
Looking at just the last few decades and how things have changed for women and what young women did and thought was perfectly fine to do, and also how we evolved into ourselves in previous decades, or anybody who's dealing with grief or living with cancer. I think no matter who you are, you're going to take a lot from this book. Is there anything else you want readers to know about this book before they pick it up, or anything you'd want to tell us about Annie?
I think that strangely that there's positivity as well that comes out of it. In that I think she was thoughtful in, although she didn't tell a lot of people about cancer, she did put together this sort of little group, and she was very careful about her partner Martin, that she sort of created this. I say in the book, like she left gifts for me, which was her two best friends and her partner. And they really, really helped me. And I think we helped Martin as well, that we then were this little group with my brother, that we would sort of get together and just talk about her. And her old friend Molly, who's from school, will be, oh, Joe, that was so Caulfield what you did there, meaning Annie. Like, just when we're out to dinner, because I will do things that are like her. And then when she said it, I could go, God, I could feel it as well. That's just exactly what she would do with her hands. But it was that way of keeping them with you till you, I suppose, a bit like stabilizers, until you can go, no, I think I'm okay that she isn't here, because then you realize, oh, but they always are here. And that I've learned to kind of love it like a sort of scar, I think, that you can touch and go, I can feel that's there, that pain. And I want it there, because I had a fear of it going, I think, because that would mean that, oh God, she's, it was like she wasn't even here. But now I know that it's never going to go. So it's okay. And that's sort of strangely comforting in grief.
I absolutely agree with that. Sometimes it sort of has to go away for a while, and it's your body protecting you. I remember after my dad died, like just suddenly the pain went away for a while, some months afterwards, and I thought, oh, I've lost him. And what kind of monster am I that I'm not living in this terrible grief? And then it would come back in a wave, and I'd feel grateful for it. But I learnt, it'll come back from time to time, but it's your body cannot live 24/7 in that, so it shuts it down for a while.
And it does change. Like you say, I had the word for it, where I would sort of dread it coming, and now I just go, oh, here it is. It's okay. And I think that's the thing, but it's there. And it is the loveliest thing that people are looking up her books. That's
Yes.
a dream. That's so lovely.
And what a gift for you to have given her posthumously to direct people back to her writing.
And to raise money for Macmillan, because she was always about, like, don't waste a day, be useful. So this would, she would love the fact that she's being useful by raising money for Macmillan.
Would you like to read anything from the book?
There's two things I had in mind. And one, I think I might do the funny one, because this is the sort of the little sister aspect of her, because she was very precocious as a teenager, much more keen to get out there and meet boys and do so, very boy obsessed, where I wasn't. I thought wasn't as interested in boys. It was more boring to me. I was interested in going out and dressing up and music. But Annie, so when she was 17, no, she's 16, and my mum and dad said she could bring a friend with her on holiday. And we went to North Wales. My mum and dad rented a cottage near Bethesda. I mean, a terrible place to bring a teenager. So she was allowed to bring Tanya. Now, Tanya was quite a grown-up girl compared to us, and even compared to Annie. And I remember she had a purdy haircut and wore full makeup. She's like a proper teenager. And so they had been allowed to go out for the night. And this is me. I was sharing a room with Tanya and Annie. I lay awake listening to every word they said after their night out in the local town of Bethesda. They'd gone to a pub, and then some local boys had walked with them to the park, and they'd sat on the swings. I liked swings. I must ask Annie where these swings are, I thought. Then Annie and Tanya started giggling and letting out little shrieks. Annie talked about a boy trying to get into her trousers. Tanya said something about a boy getting into her bra. What was going on? I pictured Annie's trousers. She'd been wearing her navy blue Oxford bags. They were very nice trousers. I'd have liked a pair like that. Did the boy not have trousers of his own? What did he want with Annie's trousers? Annie said again that he really wanted to get into her trousers. What on earth was in my sister's trousers? What did boys in Bethesda want from her trousers?
Lovely.
And I always remember that, just complete confusion about stuff like that.
It's a really lovely walk through your young mind, and you grow up with Annie as we do in the book, and I hope everybody reads it. It's very beautiful, and it's very beautifully written. It's very funny, and it's also very moving. I laughed and I cried, and I got some great insight from it as well. So thank you for writing it, Jo, and thank you for really introducing us to Annie, and I will also follow up and read more of Annie's work. You can buy it anywhere you buy your books, ideally from someone who pays their tax.
Yeah.
And just to remind you, it's called The Funny Thing About Death by Jo Caulfield. And if you are in Edinburgh, this Fringe, you can see Jo at the stand. Jo, what's the name of your show and the time of your show?
Called Razor Sharp. I'm on at 8:15 every night.
Excellent. Go and check it out. Jo is one of Britain's best stand-up comics. Thank you so much, Jo. Anything else to plug before you go?
No, I think that's it. And thank you for getting the book so much.
I really got it. I really got it.
It's great.
But I don't know who wouldn't get it, honestly. It's perfectly written. Thank you so much, Jo, for joining us today.
Thank you.